Hi everyone, and welcome to this piece discussion video, this time discussing the piece Our tower.windows-009. Our tower.windows-009 is an iteration in the ongoing Windows series, which itself belongs to the postmodern body of work. Windows as a series contemplates the way in which humanity is diluted, miscommunicated, and warped when translated through online interfaces, and the emotional implications upon those involved. It is also a series wherein I actively work through my own internal challenges contemporaneous with each iteration's production, specifically those in relation to how I interact and communicate with the online world, but also more broadly the general challenges I face just in the course of day-to-day life. For a more in-depth look at the series, you will find a link to the series overview in the description of this video. Now let's look specifically at Our tower.windows-009, and first beginning with the more universal, conceptual aspects of this piece. I wanted to make it immediately apparent on the surface of this piece that it is speaking to a generation, which is where the title Our Tower comes into play. This piece acknowledges a world where the internet is essential for daily life, and specifically how it has become so compulsory that new generations of human beings are born into this society where the internet is an essential element of our life and structure. But it's under a pretense that it wasn't necessarily one that they would ask for. Rather, this piece considers the notion that this way of life was accepted by those who came before us, and now it is the world in which we inhabit, though not one we necessarily would have chosen for ourselves. One of the largest concepts of this piece is exploring the indefatigable grip on society that the internet has, despite being flawed. It has too much of a grip, I would honestly argue, and humanity feels entombed and encumbered by it as a major construct of our entire daily life and daily functioning. Obviously, as I'm describing it, there's a lot of commentary involved in this piece, and specifically, truthfully, talking to the idea that the internet is a broken and faulty means that is unfeeling and a third party that is disinterested, but is nonetheless inside all of daily life. When you look very specifically at the title of this piece, the punctuation is meant to hasten this sense of encumbering and proximity. Our tower.windows, using that period right there, is specifically meant to make those words closer together, closer than an actual space would be when typed or written out. It's meant to deliberately show how unavoidable or interconnected the world has become to this Windows world. Another aspect of the period is in relation to computer code, because the period is in this placement functioning in a way of being like an action or an executable command by a computer code. As a layman to coding and the inner workings of computers, by no means do I speak as an expert or somebody who can really explain these sorts of functionings, but it's something that I am passingly familiar with, but enough at least to acknowledge the fact that these sorts of punctuation marks, when utilized in these functions, are about fulfilling commands rather than being emphatic or having more of an emotional idea. Moving away from the more general aspects of this piece, I want to discuss my own personal connections and my personal experiences, as well as the emotional side of this piece. And naturally, I believe I'm a part of this generation. When I use Our Tower in the title of this piece, it's because I also feel that I'm a part of those who were born into a world and have become of age in a world where the internet is an inescapable reality, and not necessarily one that I would have chosen, nor one that I would use if I had the choice. I find there to be a sense of malaise to this whole reality, and especially for somebody like me who is maybe a little older than those who were born completely into the internet world, because I do still have memory of a world where the internet was not so compulsory, where it was more of a friendly, amicable tool. There is also the sentiment of feeling trapped by this tower, that we are thrust within the tower and its confines. And this is obviously a bit of a metaphor going on between the internet itself and the world we inhabit, and the internet being that tower that we are trapped within. And obviously, as I continue discussing, it is these emotional aspects of it where it feels encumbering, it feels very tense, it feels inescapable, it feels unavoidable, it feels as though we can't go on without it, and to even try would be a fool's errand. Specifically regarding my own experience, I found that there's a great deal of confusion when it comes to communicating online. It's incredibly difficult to communicate sincerely, to feel like there's not some sort of ulterior motive or something going on below the surface that's insincere or disingenuine. And it can be very frustrating, it can be very confusing to both the person communicating and then the interlocutor as well. Moving away from that, I want to discuss the composition and the color palette, especially because with the Windows series, as I've described in the past, all 6 colors within this 6-color palette function uniquely and with different agencies in each iteration. Overall, this piece embodies a sort of structure where 2 individuals are trapped within a crumbling tower structure. I built a composition to be sort of precarious, that the figures are atop and they are stretched to the bottom of the picture plane with an embrace at the bottom, as you can see, with their arms sort of embracing each other in a slight hug form. As you move through the picture plane, there are interrupted forms. There's an unstable visual rhythm that moves throughout this picture plane from top to bottom, and very deliberately so. This is emphasized in the words, "It all comes tumbling down," in the lower right corner. This naturally has its own implications and just a denotative meaning on the surface of implying of how faulty and how Jenga-like, if you will, this structure is, to being nearly just one brick away, pulled out, to completely collapsing. But this phrase is also referenced to the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's used in that anime, and for me, it was a deeply important anime when I watched it for the very first time just a few years ago. The concept there involves the idea of some great force disrupting human life and the entire goings-on of the planet Earth that is understandably confusing and not fully comprehensible by the people who are suffering by it, and yet no less a major threat. And similarly, that's the way that I was sort of experiencing the internet. This notion, again, however, is speaking more broadly to that idea that I mentioned earlier, that this is a faulty means that is always feeling like it's on the brink of collapse, and yet it's completely engulfing our entire lives in the 21st century. And so it leaves us feeling in a sense of complete lack of control and just utter chaos. Continuing to look at more of the words in this piece, our worldwide acknowledges the placement of the internet in society upon every conceivable corner of what we do and just how we interact with one another. In the center of the picture plane, there are the words "my stomach" in a parenthetical. This is referring to the silence of the protagonist, this idea that they're suffering uncomfortably and maybe even feeling queasy by it, but they're incapable of contesting the circumstances within which they are bound, which is why the composition centers on this point and why it's sort of buried in the middle of this piece overall. In the lower left corner are the words "okay" with a question mark, which is an ironic ask, and it's meant to highlight those unfeeling confirmation boxes we see on computers or interfaces, that whether we like it or not, we're just asked to consent to whatever action is going on. This is similar to the word "hold" up in the top left corner of the picture plane, just adjacent to the male figure's head. And as it is clear, the male figure's head is cut off at the mouth, and so this again is another ironic phrase, a bit of ironic ask, and it's sort of like a line of code, as I was describing earlier, where it's forced to withhold any objection, that the person here without the mouth, the figure without the mouth, is forced to not speak without an objection, no matter what the objection he may have. And that's, again, one of the reasons why the figures are placed as they are in this piece in relation to all the colors and all of the forms. In regards to the colors, the sandbar brown and sepia in this piece are supposed to embody an exhaust smoke, an ashen sort of smolder from the friction that's caused from this imperfect, unfeeling, and continuous machine. And then we have pumpkin orange on these diagonals, these very stark diagonals that I wanted to invoke a sense of construction work, that it's always being done because it's constantly having to be rebuilt in sort of just a haphazard fashion. Similarly, we have henna red appearing, and a little more subtly, because I wanted it to be a sort of like a blood oozing from this structure, that as humanity rides within its confines, that there is unfortunately an actual ramification on our well-being in this sense as well. As I continue describing, it's about this sense of entropy. It's about this sense of chaos and breaking down throughout the course of this picture plane that the figures find themselves trapped within. Moving on, I want to end this video by discussing the placement of this iteration within the Windows series and then its impact upon the series from this point moving forward. I've always felt that our tower.windows-009 is really a flagship piece in this series and one of the larger ones within the first major 13 iteration progression in the series when I returned to it in 2021. As stated, there were 13 pieces in that progression, and these followed the initial 3, and it was really in these first 13 iterations where I found a lot of the ideas and concepts and compositional constructs that I would continue to take further as the series developed. The reason that this piece is coded as 009 is actually because of its production phase. I mentioned this is the 13th iteration in the series, but it is actually one that was started preceding 010 and those that followed. This piece took a great deal of time, and again, because of its scale and scope, I was in production with it for a while, but its title is decided with regards to its placement in the series, not necessarily its completion in the series or its time of completion. So I'm conceiving of these iterations in progression, but I'm not necessarily finishing them in the same progression since I work on multiple iterations simultaneously when I am involved in pieces in the series. As a sort of flagship, this piece reiterates some of the precedents that were earlier set by the piece Windows-100 that was found much earlier in these iterations in this new progression. This utilizes both a male and a female figure, and it also utilizes a very cacophonous color palette, especially with the way the line work in this piece is very active and utilizing both solid lines, dashed lines, double bolded lines, and diagonals. Again, these were precedents set earlier by the iteration Windows-100 or Windows-100, as I'll sometimes refer to it. But this piece takes them a step further and embraces them. Naturally, it paves the way for larger, more visually complex examples that follow in the series after our tower.windows-009. And emotionally, this piece defined a major intersection between my experience and its potential residents. As I mentioned, this piece is speaking to a lot of what I experience, but also in a way that is very generational and I feel has a chance to resonate with others of my age and those younger. And again, I wanted to speak to more broad realities. There are many iterations in the Windows series that speak to aspects of our world and the Windows world, and then speak to parts of my own life that are much more disconnected. This piece is really paving the way, however, for a much more integrated experience between what I'm experiencing and how that does relate to others. I think I will stop there for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about this piece. I hope it genuinely helps you to more intimately connect with this piece and have a richer experience viewing it. And please share this video with anybody else who might find it worthwhile. Until the next one, take care everybody. Thank you.